Hey there everyone, welcome to the Two Guys in a Cooler channel. If this is the first video you're watching from our channel, we'd like to say welcome. My name is Eric. Stick around, this is going to be an awesome video on starter cultures, more specifically starter cultures in the use for making salami. Alright, let's get down into it. So this particular video has been in the production for like 6 months. And it's because it's such an extensive topic. There's just so much information when it comes to starter cultures. And if you're into charcuterie, if you make fresh sausage, you make smoked sausage, and you're starting to wonder, hey, what's next? Curing whole muscles and even making salami, then inevitably you're going to run across starter cultures and bacteria and fermentation. And this is where most people get tripped up. I know this is where I had a lot of questions when I started. And unfortunately, there's really not one place that you can go that's going to give you the answers that you're looking for. And it seems that most people that are in home production of cured meats are doing what everybody else is doing. They're experimenting and they're just trying to figure it out on their own. And sometimes when they do figure it out, those secrets are closely guarded because it does take a lot of time and a lot of energy and unfortunately a lot of fails in order to finally understand just what you're dealing with. So let me kind of overview what's going to happen in today's video. In today's video, I'm going to share the secrets of starter cultures. I'm going to sort of demystify it for you, and it's going to get a little technical because unfortunately starter cultures is about technical data. But I want you to hang with me to the very end. We're going to cover this step by step, very slowly, and I think that by the end of this video, you're not only going to have a better understanding of starter cultures, but you're also going to be able to know what starter culture will work best for you, given the type of salami that you want to make. All right, so before we begin, I just want to say I'm really glad you're with me on this episode. If you have any questions, do not hesitate. Write them in the comment section below because I read every comment and I reply to every single question in as much detail as I feel is necessary to give you the kind of answer that'll make you feel confident about going and making salami on your own. All right, let's talk about starter culture. So first of all, starter cultures can be found all over the place. You're going to see it in products like buttermilk, sauerkraut, yogurt, cheese, obviously salami, and all a starter culture is a microbiological culture that aids in fermentation. Depending on the bacteria that are in the culture will determine the unique characteristics of the end product. What's interesting about starter cultures is that you and I aren't really supposed to have them. They were developed in the late 50s for manufacturing facilities of sausages and salamis. And the reason they were developed was so that these companies could make a more dependable, safe, consistent product in a more timely manner. You see, traditional methods for making salami utilize the natural bacteria that's either present in the environment or present on the meat itself. But that particular method for making fermented meats generally takes much longer and is somewhat unpredictable. The results aren't very consistent. And as the popularity of home production of sausages and salamis have exploded, companies that manufacture starter cultures are jumping on the opportunity to extend this particular product to us. So now we have starter cultures at our disposal, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So that's the history behind starter cultures, and there you have it. All right, so the million-dollar question is this. If traditional methods of making salami utilize the natural bacteria found in the local regions, then why is it necessary for us to use starter cultures today? And the reason is because starter cultures offer dependability, they offer us the opportunity to have a more consistent product, and they make our product safer. It is possible to make fermented salami without the use of starter cultures, but we're not going to talk about that in this episode. You're going to have to subscribe to this channel and stick around for a future episode where we go down that rabbit hole. All right, so let's talk about the purpose of starter cultures. What do they actually do to the meat? Well, first they reduce the pH, specifically with lactic acid producing bacteria, the kind of bacteria you would find in like sauerkraut and sourdough bread and things like that. The second thing they do is develop flavor, and they develop color, and we'll go into more of that later. Another thing that they do is texture formation. So texture comes in 3 parts when you're dealing with salami. First, when you mix the meat. Second, when you ferment the meat, and then third, when you dry the meat. And all of those have a critical role in playing of the mouthfeel of your particular salami. Another thing that they do is they help reduce nitrates and nitrites. So certain bacteria that are present in certain starter cultures actually aid in the reduction or the conversion of nitrates into nitrites that eventually turn into nitric oxide. And if you're new to all this and you want a little more information about nitrates and nitrites, be sure to check out my 4-part series on salts, cures, and vegetable powders where we go into a little more depth about that. And then lastly, some of the starter cultures actually have bioprotective qualities. And that's not true about every starter culture, but in today's video, I'm going to show you an example of one that actually protects your meat against listeria because of the bacteria that it has. The starter cultures that we're going to be talking about today are going to be specifically for making salami. And we're going to divide those microorganisms up into 2 different categories. The first group is going to be the type of bacteria that produces lactic acid, right? And the second group is the type of bacteria that develops color and flavor. So the first group, lactic acid producing bacteria, has 2 types of bacteria in it. One is called lactobacillus, and the second is called Pediococcus. Both of these particular groups of bacteria have one basic function, and it's to reduce the pH. The next group is all about color and flavor development, and in that group we have Staphylococcus. Its major role is going to be develop color, develop flavor, and actually help reduce the nitrate and the nitrite levels that are in your salami. So let's dig a little deeper and let's start with the Lactobacillus species. Within this group, you have 4 types of Lactobacillus bacteria that all aid in the reduction of pH. Remember, that's their only function. You have Plantarum, Pentosum, Saccai, and Curvatus, and I'm probably killing the Latin pronunciation, but that's okay. Each one of these bacteria has its own parameters, its own ability to resist salinity content, its own temperature ranges that it thrives in, its own unique desire for certain types of sugar, which we'll get into in a minute. It's not entirely important that you know this, but I want you to have a more well-rounded picture of what the bacteria does. So the next time you look at a starter culture pack and you see Lactobacillus, whichever one it is, you're going to know that that's there specifically to reduce the pH. The next group in that same family with the function of reducing the pH by producing lactic acid is the Pediococcus species. And within that species, you're going to have 2 varieties. I'm not even going to try to pronounce those. Now, what's interesting about this particular species rather than the Lactobacillus is although they do the exact same thing, they release lactic acid by consuming sugars, they are fast fermenting. So these are going to ferment a lot faster than the Lactobacillus variety. Where the Lactobacillus tend to want to grow in lower temperatures, the Pediococcus species tend to like higher temperatures. They also have a broader sugar fermenting pattern, meaning that they can consume different types of sugar in order to produce lactic acid. Okay, so that's the 2 groups that are lactic acid producing bacteria. Now we're going to get to the one group that is exclusively for color and flavor development, as well as the reduction of nitrates and nitrites, which brings us to the Staphylococcus species. Within this group, you're going to have 3 types of bacteria that's main function is to develop the flavor, the color, and to reduce the nitrate. What's interesting about this particular species is that it is pH sensitive, and so if you are fermenting your salami and your pH drops below 5.0, then all of these benefits stop working. Okay, now that we've gotten a basic overview for the different species that are in the starter cultures, the one common element that all of them have is food. They need to eat in order for them to do what they're supposed to do. And the food that these particular bacteria really like eating is sugar. There are several different types of sugars, but for this video, we're going to talk about monosaccharide and disaccharide. A monosaccharide sugar is a simple sugar. It's just one molecule. An example of that are going to be things like glucose, dextrose. You're also going to have fructose. So those types of sugars are called monosaccharides. And then an example of disaccharide sugars, which are basically multiple simple sugars connected, are going to be things like lactose, which can be most commonly found in milk, maltose, which is often found in things like molasses, and then you have sucrose, which is your table sugar, your white sugar, or your turbinado sugar. The most popular form of sugar for fermenting salami is going to be a monosaccharide, either a dextrose or a fructose, because it's the easiest for the bacteria to consume. Every form of bacteria that we mentioned today can process simple sugars. When it comes to disaccharide sugars, not every bacteria can process it, or it processes it very slowly. And so it's important to know that, because depending on how much sugar you add and what type of sugar will inevitably determine the result of your salami. Another thing to consider when it comes to sugar and bacteria are the ingredients that you're adding to your salami. Sugar can be found in a multitude of ingredients, and sometimes we don't tend to think about that. And so every ingredient that you add to your salami, you need to make sure that you understand what type of sugar it has. For instance, if you're adding things like honey, you're going to be adding monosaccharides, fructose. If you add things like wine, you're also going to be adding monosaccharides because they're high in fructose and glucose. And the same goes with other ingredients like buttermilk, cream, or regular milk, even molasses or table sugar. You're going to be adding forms of disaccharides. And so if your bacteria culture can process those, that needs to be taken into consideration as to the entire amount of sugar that you add to your salami. And the reason this is so important is because the more food you give your bacteria, the more lactic acid that they're going to produce. And the more lactic acid that they produce, the lower the pH is going to be. So having the perfect amount of sugar for the results that you're looking for is inevitably the key. As we work our way through this video on starter cultures, we've covered the bacteria and what they do. We've covered the food that they like to eat. Now we need to know how they work. And basically, in order for a starter culture to become active, we need to put it in conditions in which it thrives. As soon as you put your salami that's been inoculated with starter culture in an environment that it likes, and that could be a cellar, it could be a refrigerator, it could be a room with the right temperature, then that starter culture is going to wake up, begin eating the sugars that are available, and it's going to be releasing lactic acid. And this entire process is what's commonly referred to as fermentation. So if we want to have a properly fermented salami, we need to be aware of the different variables that could possibly take place that would affect fermentation. So let's look at some of these things that might affect fermentation. One of the things that affects fermentation is temperature. Each particular bacteria has specific parameters as to the kind of environment that they like. So when you are on the hotter end of those parameters, the faster your bacteria is going to work. And all that means is that it's going to consume the sugar a lot faster, it's going to release lactic acid a lot faster, and it's going to drop the pH a lot faster. So that may be something that you desire, or it may be something that you want to avoid. Another thing that affects fermentation is sugar, more specifically the type of sugar that you use. Now, we just talked about the different types of sugar. So whenever you are considering the sugars that you use for your salami, you need to take into consideration how the particular bacteria that's in the starter culture that you're going to be using reacts with those sugars. Now, like I said, I'm going to be doing unique videos on each starter culture so that you can have a better idea as to what sugars they like and what temperatures they like and so on and so forth. Another thing that affects fermentation is salt concentration and then water activity. What's cool is that the strains that we're discussing here in this video are relatively hardy and they can handle a high concentration of salt in the product. And so that's not something we have to worry about too much, but water activity is. And the water activity is basically the amount of water that is active in your salami. The lower that water activity goes, the more ineffective the bacteria become. So as soon as the fermentation process begins, you want to make sure that you keep the humidity of your room or of your chamber at 90 to 95% humidity so that it encourages the bacteria to stay hydrated and to do their job. As soon as you start to dry your salami, your bacteria becomes inefficient. A couple of the things that affect fermentation is the quality of the meat. If your meat is fresh, it's going to have the least amount of foreign microorganisms living on it. This is important because the more foreign microorganisms that are living on your meat, the more competition you're giving your starter culture. And we want to give our starter culture the absolute best circumstances possible. So the freshest you can possibly get your meat, absolute best. Another thing to consider is the quality of the starter culture itself. Handling the starter culture is incredibly important. You want to make sure you keep it frozen. Only take your starter culture out when you're going to use it. Make sure you weigh it out and measure it out for your salami project, and then quickly put it back in the freezer. You want to make sure that you keep this in frozen conditions at all times. The longer it's out of those conditions, the quicker that it degrades. And since we're talking about fermentation, let's go over the safety hurdles. In the beginning of this video, we talked about how starter cultures will make your product safer. And that's true because as you reduce the pH, you create an environment that's inhospitable to some organisms. Now, it's important to know that a starter culture cannot replace the use of a curing agent like Instacure number 1 or Instacure number 2, but instead it works in conjunction with your curing agent. So there's multiple hurdles whenever you make salami. One of them is salt content, one of them is your cure, another one is your fermentation, and all of these work together to create a safe and edible product. So when you're fermenting your salami using a starter culture, the hurdle that you want to try to achieve is at least a pH of 5.3. And that brings me to my next point on pH and how to measure it. If you're going to be making salami, it would be my advice to you to invest in a device that can accurately measure the pH of your meat, not only before you begin, but also through the process of fermentation. Being able to determine the pH of your meat can make the difference between a mediocre salami and an exceptional salami. And there's a couple different ways to do that. The most inexpensive way to do that is litmus paper or pH strips. And if you're going to choose to go down that road, I don't personally recommend it because the results aren't very accurate, but at least it's a start and it'll give you a ballpark figure of what your pH is at. You want to make sure that you get your hands on these types of pH strips, the types that measure in smaller increments. So you don't want necessarily whole number pH strips. You want ones that measure decimal points. What you're looking for is something that measures between 4.5 to 5.5, somewhere in that range, because that's inevitably where you're going to want to end up. A more reliable way to check your pH is using a pH meter. This particular pH meter is made by Milwaukee, and it takes into consideration the temperature of your meat as well as the pH, because both of those variables play a huge part. If you're serious about making salami, you definitely want to consider investing in a pH meter, and pH meters range from $100 on up to $500–600. The reason I like this particular unit is because it's affordable, it's accurate, you can calibrate it so that you can get true results every time you take your reading, and it's pretty easy to use. I'm going to put a link below where you can check out this meter, litmus paper, all of these starter cultures, as well as the dextrose and corn solids, which is all going to be food for the starter cultures, so that you can kind of have like a one-stop shop for pretty much everything that we're talking about in this video. As we wrap up our discussion on starter cultures, I want to say thanks for hanging with me. I know it's a long video. This is a huge topic, and I want to make sure that we do it justice. And so the last thing I want to talk about is selecting the right starter culture. So how do you know which starter culture to choose? Well, what we're going to do is pick 3 of the most popular starter cultures on the market today. We're going to take the information that we learned about the bacteria, we're going to apply it to the starter culture, and then you'll be able to make a more informed decision. So the very first one that we're going to talk about is a starter culture called TSPX. This is probably the most popular starter culture in salami making today. People like this particular starter culture because you have a very controlled pH drop. It's not too fast, it's not too slow. If you can notice right here, you have a Pediococcus strain and a Staphylococcus strain in this particular starter culture. We know from the beginning of this video that Pediococcus is designed to lower the pH by releasing lactic acid, and Staphylococcus is flavor developed. You get a really nice lactic acid flavor, and the Staphylococcus in it yields a really nice color formation with a very round and mild flavor. So this is going to be typical for your Southern European salamis and your more traditional style salamis. One pack of this starter culture will make up to 440 pounds of salami. So as you can see, a little bit is all you need. It also has an expiration date, which is important to check. And on the back side, you have some just really easy to follow instructions. This particular starter culture produces the highest quality salami with the most superior flavor because of the development. And your TSPX, you want to make sure that you maintain anywhere between a 5.0 and a 5.3 pH. Because remember, as soon as we drop below 5.0, that Staphylococcus becomes inefficient. The bacteria that's in TSPX can consume both monosaccharides and disaccharides as food. And so you're not limited to just using things like corn solids or dextrose. You can also use table sugar, which will feed the bacteria, allowing them the opportunity to do what they're supposed to do. A few examples of the type of salami that can be made with TSPX are French saucisson. You can make Milano, Genoa, Calabrese, Soppressata. You can make Italian pepperoni. It's just, there's so many, it's hard to narrow it down, but you get the idea. TSPX is generally going to be used on salamis that take longer than 3 weeks to make. And so if you're going to be using sodium nitrate in your salami, there's a good chance that you're going to be using TSPX as the starter culture. Okay, and that is TSPX. The next starter culture I want to talk about is called FRM52. FRM52 is a particular starter culture that's going to deliver a salami very similar to that of a North European style or even a US style salami. Things like American pepperoni, summer sausage, Danish salami, German metwurst, these are all salamis that have a production time of generally less than 3 weeks, and the final product is either cooked or smoked. Most of the products made with this particular starter culture, because of the rate in which it acidifies or lowers the pH of the salami, will have a very signature tangy or sour flavor. If you notice in the ingredients right there at the very top, you have a lactobacillus strand and you have a staphylococcus strand. The lactobacillus is for pH dropping, and the staphylococcus is for flavor and color development. What's interesting about that particular lactobacillus strand is that it does not consume sucrose for food. So if you're going to use FRM52, then you have to use a monosaccharide like fructose or dextrose. Because the production time is so quick on products that use FRM52, you're not entirely worried about nitrate reduction because you're using generally sodium nitrite, because this is a product that's going to take less than 3 weeks to make. Your target pH for this particular product is going to be somewhere in the range of about 4.7 to 4.8, and generally they're going to be cooked or smoked after it's all said and done. Okay, that is FRM52 as a starter culture. Finally, we're going to talk about FLC. This is a fascinating starter culture because it has like dual purpose. Depending on the temperature in which you ferment at will determine the type of salami that you end up having. So for instance, if you use this starter culture and you end up fermenting your salami on the high end, let's say 100 degrees, you're going to end up with a North European style or a US style salami, much like FRM52. But if you ferment your salami at somewhere between 70 degrees, 75 degrees, you're going to end up with a product a little more like TSPX. A lot of people like the versatility of this particular starter culture because you can use this one starter culture to achieve multiple things depending on what you're looking for. And if you can look right there in the top, you'll see the ingredients listed. And this starter culture, FLC, has a lactobacillus strain, a staphylococcus strain, and a pediococcus strain. Now, lactobacillus, pediococcus are pH reducers, and staphylococcus is flavor and color development. What's interesting about the particular pediococcus strain that's in this one is it actually gives bioprotection to this particular starter culture. So FLC is also a bioprotective culture protecting your meat against listeria. So there you have it. Those are the 3 most popular starter cultures, and hopefully with the information that I gave you, you can now make a better and more informed decision on which one works for you. If you happen to ask which one I would recommend TSPX. It's probably the easiest to use. In my opinion, it does have the most incredible flavor profile as well as aroma and texture development. So for me, I tend to go TSPX, but I do like some of the other ones depending on the kind of salami that I'm making. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you click that subscribe button right now because in future videos, we're going to cover each one independently. So we'll do a video about TSPX, how to use them, how to get the most out of them, and same thing with FRM52 and then FLC so that you can get a first-hand look of how to use them. If you're still with me, I want to say thank you for sticking around to the very end of this video on this epic adventure talking about starter cultures and salami and fermenting meat. I know this can be an overwhelming topic and somewhat confusing because of the information that's out there. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate, write them in the comment section below, or if you just want to share your thoughts. If you liked this video and got anything out of it, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to share and stick around because we got new videos coming every single week. We'll see you soon.